So now we've built up our infrastructure. Let's start to use it. And of course, one of the things that we have inherited here is the Microsoft identity um, framework. So that this is just going to give us our ability to create, save users, and do things like roles. And again, I'm using this in lieu of the Firebase, only because I'm more comfortable in the back end and working with .NET. Um, so we're going to set up this web API. Um, it's going to be, and all these are based upon model view control or MVC. And I'll just take the out of the box value controller, and we're going to modify that and add some methods to it so that we can call them from iOS. Well, we can call them from anywhere through web APIs, but of course, this is a little class on creating doing this from iOS. The first thing I notice here is, and I'm not going to be typing in the code, I'll just look right in my finished code, is that we've modified our default constructor. And here we have our values controller, my constructor, is going to take three parameters. One, the DB context, and then the user manager and the sign-in manager. And the user manager and sign-in manager are inherited from identity. And because we're using dependency injection at constructor time, then these are the services that will be added to my web application, and we just store them locally here as the user manager and the sign-in manager. So then I went down here and I added a couple methods here. One to be able to create users, and remember this is C# async, so I'm creating these as asynchronous methods. Um, Again, for more on that, there's lots of descriptions of this on in the internet. I won't go too deep here. Just saying that I'm going to use an await, and so this is not going to complete. We're not going to move on to the next statement until this completes. And so this method will just let me create users, and I'm going to pass in here the user ID and the password, and that password is passed. Now this is just a method in my user manager, and I'm going to pass it the user ID and the password, and the password will end up being encrypted for us. And then we look at the result, and if the result works, then if this works, then we just set our result to success and our message to OK. And this return stuff is just a class with a couple of variables, results, a message, and later a user DTO. But we're not going to look at this quite yet. So then, and then we have so that lets us create users. And of course, that'll result in a new user going in my database. And then the login will just take the user ID and password. Again, it's another asynchronous method. And we call them the sign-in managers password with sign-in. Of course, this is the async version. So we're not going to get down to our next statement until this completes. And again, we just fill in and return the results back to the caller. And the caller in this case is iOS. Then I think I've got, let's see, one more method here. The logout. The logout I really don't use, but well, it'll just sign up the users, so it's no longer, our current user is not the active user. So now we're going to take a look. This is our C# side. We're now through with our server side. We've done what we need to look at how to employ and to use these APIs from our iOS application. So now let's see how we can consume these REST APIs from our iOS application. Of course, we're going to be using Swift. And as a long-time C# developer. I must say I'm very impressed by Swift. Of course, it's the newest of the C-based languages, and they've added some nice wrinkles um, that let us do things like closures. And so, but I'm not going to go too much into this because, of course, the Udemy course covers this in detail, and I'm just going to drill down to the parts that let us how to show these, how to use these .NET APIs from our Swift code. And the first thing, I have a simple storyboard here. The storyboard just lets us have our user ID and password, and we toggle this button between a sign up and a login. Again, all these details are on the Udemy site, and it's pretty. I think it was only about $15 or so for this class. So, anyways, let's not go there. Let's not go into those details, but let's just look at how I consume these. And my login controller is when, of course, I do have I have outlets here for the password text field and the user ID and the switch button. And depending upon so when we take a look at the switch mode, it's just will let us toggle between the two states, either the login or creating the new user. And when that top button is tapped, depending upon the state, whether I'm in the login mode, the URL that I'm going to create is values/login or values/create. And of course, these are all running from localhost. I could, because this is it's a web API, I can host this anywhere, but I'm just using my Mac here to do all my development. So this is we're opening up a port on localhost and making these calls. So if we want to pass as query items, we're passing the user ID and password, and we're using this data task to make the call over to our web API. And in our closure, we will take a look and look at use the JSON decoder to look at the results from our server. But to look at this in more detail, we'll run the debugger. So the first thing we do is we want to start up our ASP.NET server, and we just launch it. And we've got, and this of course we can run on my local host on port 5000. And I know the server is running when I see this value 1 and value 2, because this is what is returned here by my get. So my server APIs are now exposed and are ready for action, be able to do something. So, and the one we're going to exercise is create user and log in. And we just set a breakpoint right here in both create user and log in. So now we go over to our Xcode, and we will. I'm going to start up my application here, and we're running in the context of the simulator. In this case, it's just easier to record from. And remember, I have these two modes here. Let's go to switch this to sign up. And so when we hit the register button, we're going to register a new user. And let's just change this to, so now we're in this register mode, and we want to register this user foo at beltsouth.net. And we hit our register button, and we should hit, and we do hit the breakpoint in our our C Sharp in our ASP.NET Core server, and we this is an asynchronous method. Of course, we're using await, and this whole method is marked as being as async. Um, Again, there's lots of documentation on this on the internet, but you'll need to know that the next statement is not executed until we have we performed this method is completed. So we run, and then we look at our result. Now we're asking of course here we're asking our identity services to create this user, and we see what our result is, and we will return this in this JSON, and the return stuff here. And let's drill down on return and we can look and test and see what this is. And return stuff, we have our message okay, and the result success. And this we now are going to take and serialize this into the JSON and return it over to our Xcode. So now we're back in our closure in Xcode, and the first thing we do is we set up our JSON decoder, and then we're going to call our wrap this around a try catch, and we will try decoding. Now we're decoding into this object or into the structure that I call current user info, and it's going to handle either a create or a login. In case of a login, it will return a user and later on a snap. In this case, we're just doing our create, and so we have to have some optionals. Oh, and by the way, we're using the Swift for Codable, and the Codable simply marks this as a type that we can type that can convert itself into out of an external representation, and of course, in this case, JSON. And because these are optionals, we have to check that the values are not null, because if they are null or nil, we will throw. So we do this. Unfortunately, we have to do these one by one, and to serialize these into the JSON into our object. And so now we return from our decoding our JSON, and now we have our return data object. We can just drill down here and see what it looks like. It has, as expected, has this optional string result set to success and message OK. And then we just take and look at the take and examine our results here, and if we're in login, if we're in of course the result is the result was success. So we're going to follow through to and we're in login mode. So we run down to this breakpoint, and we want to show a message saying this actually works. So we have to execute this on the main thread. So we just use dispatch queue, and then we should see our message saying that indeed our create worked. So now, of course, if we go over and we look at our database, we should be able to see the results here, and I just need to refresh this guy. And we did. I created. There was a few objects here. I created. There is Ted. So and Foo. So both of these. Whenever we do this register, we're just adding new users to our user table, and most of this is taken care of by the .NET framework. Before I go any further, I forgot to mention, because I'm using my completed project, I had to add a couple more services to in my configure services method back in startup. So I'm in startup.cs, And in the configure services where we're using our dependency injection, I have to inject a couple other services here, add identity and add entity framework stores, so that the identity is going to be using the entity framework for doing its persistence to our database. And I also configured my password requirements here, such as requiring a digit is false, the length is 5, and in lowercase m, etc. So after we edit these, now before we go further, I want to make sure that I define my snap class, because remember what we're going to do finally. We're going to have snap. This is a snap clone. So what we want to do is I need a snap class which will define my snaps. And again, under models, I'm going to define the snap. And it's simple, and it has an ID, from, a description. Now the photo ID, is going to be the photo that we're going to store in our database. And then now there's a little wrinkle here. Let's look at user. Every user is going to have a list of snaps. So we're going to extend identity user. So my user extends identity user, and we add to this a list of snaps for that user. Now, the of course main subject of this application is being able to control our snaps, and our snaps. Every user can send snaps. A snap are just a photo that we will send to another one of our snap users, and they're not going to disappear magically the way they do on real snaps. But so we create this model. This model will now define our snaps, so that we'll have we're going to end up adding a snap table to our database, and this will have an ID, the snap ID, a from field, what user it came from, description, and the photo ID, which will be the ID of the photo that we're going to store in our database, and this will be an image sent from the iOS device. Now we have to form a relationship here to our user, and so we add the as a public property to Snap, we add our user. Now there's a couple ways, and of course, in the end result in our database, what we wanted to see is a foreign key, and because we got into this is how we define relationships in our SQL database. Now, the way there's two ways of doing this with Entity Framework. You can do it by convention, or you can do it with the Fluent API. So I'm going to be using the Fluent API. So we take a look back at my context. You will see here on model creating, when this is called, we're going to define our relationship between a user has many snaps, which with one, and each snap has a user. So this is a one-to-many relationship, and so after we do this and we take a look at our database, you will see. Oh, I forgot. The way that this defines, of course, our classes. The next step we need to do is to update our database, and we have to add a migration. And the migration we will do a add, and we will add Snap. Now I've already done this, so I will just this will fail. And if we do the add snaps and then the database update, then we will get we will have our classes will result in our tables being updated. So if we and a new migration, and this migration will look something like this, where This is the migration which was created with that add snaps. We do a create table for our snaps, and we define the fields. And we build and then we build the snaps to the user ID uh, foreign key. So now if we look at our database and we open it with our browser, we will see we have a snaps table. And there is a foreign key. When we look down here, here is our snaps to user ID foreign key. So we should be in pretty good shape to now start using and creating snaps and saving them in our database.